Rachel Service here, the CEO of Happiness Concierge and the author of There Has to Be More, the Essential Guide to Personal Growth. Let's talk about step 2 in the growth process, which is finding your way back. And I love this Maori proverb, ka mara ka muri, walking backwards into the future. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this exercise where we talk about remember happy you, remember amazing, excellent you, remember when you felt the most like you. And then we can take steps forward to address, well, if that's the goal, we want to get back to that. Or if we have yet to experience that, we want to get towards that, right? What's changed? What's evolved? What's grown? What's outgrown, maybe? And we can start to bring our awareness to, we're creating a line in the sand. We've got our catchphrase, we've got our life order, and now we can go, great, here's where I want to go. And here's where things started to change or evolve or grow or expand or diminish. And from there, we can go, it is possible to feel happy again, to feel great again, to feel excellent again, or if that's a stretch for you, most like yourself again. And from that place of empowerment, of clarity, of knowing where those elements started to change, we're actually future-proofing ourselves, as they say, from either taking that step again, or we've got some great learnings, right? And we can just move on with our lives. So if you've got the Essential Guide to Personal Growth, which would be this book here, you will find yourself at page 78, 79. And if you are along with the Essential Workbook for Personal Growth, we are over here at page 36. All right. So I'm going to ask you to go through a bit of an expansive, reflective exercise. So you might want to close your eyes. You might want to read along in your workbook, but just go with me here. I'm going to invite you back to a time where you felt the most energized, confident, and or in control, safe and secure. So think about a time where you felt safe, secure, in control, powerful, energized, and confident. Here are some prompters for you. What were you doing? Where were you? Who were you with? What did it feel like? What was the vibe? What details do you recall? Maybe what you could smell, what you could hear, what you could see? What details can you recall? Do you remember being consciously aware of a particular thought or a mantra or a state of mind? Do you remember being conscious of what you might have been thinking or talking about? Yeah. So as you reflect on this, just have a think about that scenario and think, what was present in that scenario? Yeah, what was present in that scenario? Or maybe what wasn't, right? I know when I've got great memories of that, I'm alone, the sun's shining, I've got a power blazer on, I'm walking in the sun, I've got a coffee, like I'm by myself. That's what it makes it so great, right? Or another example might be I'm on the stage, I did a TED talk. I love just every part about it. It was totally my jam. You know, that felt amazing. I'd love to feel that again. I love feeling like that, you know? So here's another series of questions, right? Go with me here. What boundaries or agreements might have been in place to ensure that you could feel that way? So an example might be you might have said no to something, or you might have said yes to something, right? You might have made an agreement on what you'd spend time with. You might have been a structured activity. If you find your memory going towards an activity, it might be because you signed up for it and organized it. And studies have shown that we love the anticipation of organizing things, sometimes a little bit more than the actual experiences, right? Yeah, so what boundaries are in place, and conversely, what decisions, another way of looking at it might be, what decisions have you made or did you make or that were in place that contributed to that scenario? So when I think about, the TED Talk, for example, the decisions that I'd made 5 years prior was that my dream is to be on a stage like that. I'd already made that decision. Once I'd made that decision, it was then up to me to act. And over time, I kind of figured out what to talk about, what was my vibe, and found how can I show myself and how can I create small moments of that? So the small moment was, inviting people to come to my first talk on burnout. I think about 5 people were there. My sister was in the crowd. My now spouse was. I got a photographer. I asked them to, film it so it looked really packed. They made everyone sit at the front. All those kind of things, right? I'd made that decision, which meant that I found myself through heaps of work between then and now, right? I found myself in that scenario. Or the example where I'm, power strutting with a coffee and a blazer on the way to work. I'd made the decision that I would love to keep doing what I was doing. I loved working. I loved dressing up for work. The decision I'd made was really show people what you can do. Don't wait for the opportunity, create the opportunity. I'd made that choice in my mind, so I'm always thinking about how can I show people what I'm capable of? How can I do a video to show people that? How can I, hey, written a book, there you go figure, creating the opportunity. And finally, I want you to think about what was not present in that scenario that made it so awesome. Maybe it was a certain type of person. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was a feeling. Maybe it was a mindset. What was not present in that scenario? So in my TED Talk example, what wasn't present? There was no way I wasn't going to do it, right? Like I had emotional highs and lows along the way and figuring out what am I going to talk about. And I talk about all of that in the talk, right? But what was not present was any kind of excuse. It was going to happen. It was a non-negotiable. Or in the example of walking down the street, in my power blazer and coffee, what's not present is other people. Like I'm an introvert, having time to myself. The sun is shining on my face. I'm listening to probably Beyonce, right, on a playlist, right? What's not present is other people's voices. And that's so important to me, reminding myself of who I am as well. So have a think about, as you cast your mind back to, or your ear or your sight back to feeling really happy, what was present? What decisions had you made? And what was not present? The reason I'm really passionate about you focusing on what decisions you've made is because that's another tick in the self-efficacy bucket, in the self-belief bucket, in the validation bucket, in the evidence. That's evidence, validation, and self-belief, as we've talked about in our confidence equation, haven't we? That you can trust yourself. And while you might not feel the best that you have ever felt right now, like you're watching this video for a reason, you're reading this book, you're listening to this audiobook for a reason, there have been conditions where you have felt the same. It's because you made a decision, and you can trust your gut, you can trust your instinct. And conversely, when you haven't felt great, you don't need to doubt yourself, although as tempting as it is. Instead, you can say, that decision didn't work out for me, or I turned left when I should have turned right. Good to know. That act of self-compassion towards those decisions, and I know that from experience, can be super powerful. Yeah. As you go through this exercise, if you could share any lessons that you've learned since then with that version of yourself, what lessons have you learned? And again, I'm putting into your achievement audit here. What lessons have you learned? I'm on your team here. Since that happy time, what have you learned about yourself? What have you learned not to do? And what have you learned really lights you up? Now, as an extension of this exercise, and go at your own pace, I'm going to invite you, because this is how growth works, little by little, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, stretch by stretch, stretch reassurance. I want you to remember the excellent you. And if excellent you, a step above happy you, doesn't ring quite true for you or your authentic experience, how about this? When you felt the most like you. When you felt the most like you. Alrighty, so we'll be here on page 38 of the Essential Workbook, and then we're on, where are we? Page 81 of the Essential Guide to Personal Growth. Very cool. Very cool. So when you think about the excellent you, here are some ideas. The idea is that we take one step thinking about happy or fulfilled ourselves, and then we take another step further. It's like going for a run. If you haven't run for a year, you're not going to run a marathon. Instead, you're going to go for maybe a 1 minute run and then take a break. Like that great app, what is it? Couch to 5K, for example. You're going to take a moment. So describing the excellent you, or the most like you, when you felt this way, I was, I felt or I had. When I felt this way, I was or was not. I felt and I had. When I felt this way, I was energized by. I was energized by. I was experiencing things I was doing, thinking, feeling, wondering. I communicated. I said no to, or said yes to maybe, depending on what the opportunity was. Or I delegated in a work setting. So as a few examples, clients have shared with me, I was energized by my work, or I felt most like myself when I was with my friend group, my core friend group, or I felt really energized when I felt in control of my career. I took that promotion, but in hindsight, it wasn't the opportunity that stretched me. It's that I don't want to manage people. Honestly, I hear that more often than you might think. It's a real thing. Or I communicated my needs and they were heard. So that's an idea for you to think about the excellent you. And if this is a growth process for you, take your time with it. Hit pause on this and give yourself permission to kind of come back to yourself and remember that. I often find myself, when I'm having moments, once I just come back to the core of who I am, and now I've got a few tools up my toolkit to do that on a quicker evolution. It just helps me center myself and go, I'm still like the Rachel who's, I don't know, I think I was 6 in Oshkosh overalls that are pink and white posing for the camera. Like I'm still that person. Even with all this other stuff, right? I've manifested pink in my life somehow, go figure. So I'm turning the page now to move over to page 83 in the Essential Guide and then page 40 in the Essential Workbook. Yeah. So since that beautiful time, and if you want to put a lid on that beautiful time, press pause and come back to this exercise. If you've got the idea of your excellent time, your great time, your happy time, or your when you most felt like you time, I'd like to invite you to the next section, which is the counter to this, right? Now that we're clear on what great looks like, or good, or secure and control looks like, let's flip on over to what's changed since then, because we're here for a reason, right? So since you felt that way that you've described earlier, what's changed? What's evolved? And thought starters might include, I took on a new job. I moved cities. I started seeing someone new. I avoided something that came up and it got a little bit overwhelming. I took on more responsibility. I said no to a few things, and that had a flow-on effect of whatever that might look like. What's changed since then? I've had children. That's a big life change. I bought a house. I've moved. I took on a new job. Wow. The opportunities are endless, right? So I want you to think about what has changed, and it doesn't need to be a huge aha moment. It can be heaps of micro moments. So if you're looking for inspiration, you might think, well, I don't know, that's why I'm here. Head on over to your life audit that you would have done earlier, and ask yourself, what is scoring below 6 and, if more, below 3, and what has changed in those categories? So if you were low in, say, community in that category, what's changed? Have you changed? Has the organization changed? Has your community evolved? Chances are you've changed. That's what I reckon. Or since, another example is since I moved to a new city, I'm in a pandemic, it's kind of, it's a new arena, meeting people online. Or since I started my side hustle, it's kind of tricky to focus on my day job. Or since I had that conversation with that colleague at work, or since I got that piece of feedback, or since that weird moment, I found it kind of hard to kind of get on the proverbial horse again. Or since that awkward interaction, I just don't feel the same way about that again. Or I can't actually remember why. It just feels like a blur the last few years. That's okay too, right? So what have you noticed since things have changed? What have you noticed? What are some of the maybe patterns, the behaviors, the patterns? Or another way of thinking about patterns is, what's the stuff that kind of always happens? Like there's a reason for that, right? What always seems to happen recently? And as a result, what are you wondering, thinking, feeling? So just take your time with it. It sounds simplistic, but it's actually quite deep, right? Sneaky, sneaky Rachel. Since that happy time, or when you felt most like yourself, what may have changed, may have evolved, may have dissipated? What elements of your life, and go back to your life audit for tips here, or prompters, may have evolved and changed And maybe that change was you. And if that is, I want to say, hey, you and I, we're no different. We're all growing, right? Change is not a bad thing. It simply means that it's time to evolve, which is a really beautiful thing. Really beautiful thing. Be gentle with yourself as you go through this process. And if you go through this process and you think, Rach, I actually can't remember when I last felt safe and secure, I strongly urge you to seek the support of a trained therapist, a counselor, a trained professional where you can step through these kind of deeper inquiries in a private, confidential setting. I know that I've definitely been the benefactor of seeing people privately where I can just have kind of deeper inquiry that I'm not yet prepared or ready or want to do by myself, right? I'm doing it with a specialist is such a great way to kind of unpack some of these things and go, great. So that's probably something I could think about with the support of a professional. And maybe these are some other areas, maybe for my coach and I, or these are areas just for me. Be clear about this is all about you, and there's no wrong way to do it. Look after you, and when in doubt, seek the services of a trained professional. They can help you make sense of this as well. At the end of the day, you're here for a reason, and even if we're not fully clear on what's changed, when we are clear on that, we can take ownership of that, and from that place we can take steps of positive action. Thanks for watching. Look after yourself, have fun, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of my beautiful Happiness Concierge team at hello@happinessconcierge.com. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.